I'll start with Deuteronomy 34, 1 through 8. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. The Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the Lord's command. He was buried in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His sight was unimpaired, and his vigor had not abated. The Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the period of mourning for Moses was ended. And now Joshua 1, 1 through 6. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, "My servant Moses is dead. Now proceed to cross the Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the Israelites. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and the Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, to the great sea in the west shall be your territory. No one shall be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall put this people in possession of the land that I swore to their ancestors to give them."
Our New Testament lessons today come from Paul's first letter to the church in Corinth and also the book of Hebrews. Listen now to God's word for us. When one says, "I belong to Paul," and another, "I belong to Apollos," are you not merely human? What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. The one who plants and the one who waters have a common purpose, and each will receive wages according to the labor of each, for we are God's servants, working together. You are God's field, God's building. According to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation, and someone else is building on it. Each builder must choose with care how to build on it. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one that has been laid. That foundation is Jesus Christ. And from the book of Hebrews. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This is, I'm going to guess, my 510th sermon at Westminster. Between them all, I figure I've spoken about 1 million words to you. Literally. Do you realize that's more words than the entire Harry Potter series, all 7 books combined? 1 million words. Though let's be honest, the Harry Potter books are more memorable. Even for me. I mean, 1,000,000 words. How many can you remember? If it's none, that's really okay. I'm not mad at you. I promise. Because two things. First, a story I read. Many years ago, a man complained in a letter to the editor that he was giving up church. Because he said, I have gone for 30 years now. And in that time, I have heard thousands of sermons. But for the life of me, I can't remember a single one of them. So I think I'm wasting my time. And the pastors are wasting theirs by giving sermons at all. The letter was the subject of much discussion, as you might imagine, back and forth in the editorial page for weeks, until someone wrote, I've been married for 30 years. In that time, I have been fortunate to have had my wife cook some 30,000 meals. To be honest, I'm not sure I remember the whole menu from too many of those meals. But I do know this. They all nourished me and gave me the strength I needed to do my work. Some were better than others. But they all fed me when I was hungry and reminded me I was loved. So out of 1,000,000 words, if there aren't too many memorable ones, that's okay. I'm not mad. Because of that story, and because I have one more chance. So here are 2 words. If you remember nothing else, remember Jesus. Dana's grandpa is a pastor, as is her dad, her brother, and her uncle. That's another story for another day. He is 88 years old. He does not preach much anymore. But after a lifetime of ministry, he still signs every birthday card, ends every phone call, every letter he writes with those words, remember Jesus. You can remember that. Life in the church isn't always only about Jesus, though, right? It's about what God is doing through us. It's about coming to understand who Jesus is and why he matters. It's about proclaiming forgiveness and grace in a world that clings to anger and revenge. Church is about showing one another just a little bit of God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Church is about people, too. Let's be honest. It's about our friends, our mentors, our children, and yes, our pastors. I grew up in the First Presbyterian Church of Royal Oak. Craig Davies baptized me. My dad's best friend, I screamed the whole time. Tom Kirkman intimidated me. In a good way. He was a man who took being a pastor seriously. I don't know what he looked like without a black robe. Bill Rumsey came to my high school once when my world history class did a unit on world religions. He wore a purple suit. Our group got an A-. I'm still bitter about it. Dick Faust stumbled through the role of Jacob to my Joseph in the most unremarkable church musical in history. Bill Russell took me to lunch, wanted to know if I was serious about being a pastor, and he gave me a job. Carl Eschenbrenner ordained me, John Bush officiated my sister's wedding with me, and Tom Rice welcomed me into his pulpit as we buried my grandparents. I remember all of them. I do. But more than that, I remember Jesus. And here. Well, for those who are interested, my cryless streak for baptisms is still intact. Baptizing your children is one of my most awesome privileges. I remember preaching in front of all the former pastors of this congregation, sharing that camaraderie with them. I remember the pratfalls and bruises of the VBS characters. I remember Godspell, and I remember 1,000 other moments. I remember ordaining true servant leaders in this congregation. The weddings of kids who were no older than my kids when I first met them. And maybe most, I remember the final goodbyes to saints of God who had become friends. But more than all of that, I remember Jesus. Because this love that we've shared over the years, well, it was never about the pastor. It was about Jesus and how Jesus is moving in this community of faith. You know, I do remember all of those pastors and that all of them had very different gifts. I remember some were better at some things than others. And that wasn't always the easiest thing in the world to deal with. It never has been. Not from the earliest days of the church. In Corinth, the people were fighting over that. You see, Paul had been preaching Christ all over. He was very effective. In fact, Paul's followers even got some of John the Baptist's disciples to understand how central Jesus was, how they were a part of the story of Jesus, and then they came alongside them to preach Christ. Apollos had been one of those people in Ephesus. He preached there, and he preached as a disciple of John. And then he was discipled into Christ by Priscilla and Aquila, and eventually was preaching the gospel of Christ in Corinth, and he was good at it. The book of Acts says he greatly helped those who through grace had believed. He powerfully refuted the Jews in public, showing by the scriptures that Christ was Jesus. That's all good. But then the people started fighting. They missed Paul. They were saying, I like Pastor Paul. I'm only listening to him. But then others, I'm devoted to Pastor Apollos. He's the man. Paul gets wind of this, and he's not happy. He kind of mocks the Corinthians, saying, man, you guys can't even handle the stuff I am spoon-feeding you without fighting. He says, grow up. Understand, it's not about either of us. They've taken their eyes off Christ, instead fixing their eyes on something other than Jesus. I don't think you can blame them. It's natural. I mean, there are still celebrity preachers, right? Paul and Apollos were the first. But Paul was not having that. He says, what is Paul? What is Apollos? It's kind of a harsh question. But follow him when Paul answers his own question. Who's Paul? Who's Apollos? Servants, through whom you came to believe. When Paul uses the word servants there, it's not the word he often uses, which is doulos, or slave. In this case, it's the word diakonia, what we call deacons. You know, before deacons were what we know them to be, the word had a very specific function. A deacon was someone who brought food out to distribute to people eating. Like in fancy restaurants, waiters and waitresses are called servers. That's what Paul means by servants here. He and Apollos are just people serving up the food. They didn't make it, they didn't grow it, pick it, cook it, or plate it. That's God. And they don't eat it. That's you. They're just trying to get what God has given for His people to the table without falling all over themselves in the process. And I don't want to trivialize anything that's happening here today, but listen. You know what happens when your favorite waiter leaves your favorite restaurant? Nothing. I mean, you might be sad, but you go back. You get a different waiter. Somebody else brings your food. It's the same kitchen behind the meal. Paul planted, Apollos watered, God gave the growth. Listen, the waiter was great while it lasted, but you still got to eat. Because there is a feast, an abundant feast waiting for you. Jesus Christ himself is available to you, being served again and again in ways too numerous to count, certainly too numerous to remember. But even though you don't remember all the meals, you do know what they've done for you. So as you've been instructed in the book of Hebrews, you do not neglect meeting together, but fix your eyes on Jesus. Know that in Christ your foundation is sure. There is no foundation but Jesus Christ. And so in this moment, I feel a little like the waiter who comes over after you finish and doesn't set your check down yet, but holds the check before setting it down on the table, as if something they say at that point is going to make or break your meal. It isn't, is it? You have been fed with the word of life, and hopefully, on my best days, I took a cue from Moses. Just did my best. Served up what God prepared, got out of the way, so that God could unfold wonders in your lives. Nevertheless, I have been profoundly grateful to set the Lord's table for you all these years. I can't really remember all I said, but I do remember you. I remember seeing the face of Jesus in your faces and knowing the love of God through your love. So this waiter is grateful, proud even, to have carried food to this table. I know that you too are grateful to have been nourished for faith, to have sat at table together and to remember. To remember Paul, remember Apollos, but mostly we remember Jesus. Because that was the point all along. That's always been the point. That's it. Remember? Remember Jesus. And go with God. Amen.